No, I just need the mouse.
As usual, we're a little bit of a hot mess, but we're gonna get rolling. Okay. So thank you for being here today. This is kind of best practices. Basically, we're just gonna we're in the spring market, things are rocking and rolling. Everybody's doing well. $61 million in closed transactions in dash month to date is a big number. So congrats on that. We talked about it a little bit Tuesday, but it is definitely a spring market. It is a goofy market. We don't really know what the hell's happening from day to day, and we're just all plugging away, right? So what we thought would be helpful is to get back into some of the mechanics, some of the basics, some of the hot button issues. And it's really interesting from market to market. We seem to address the same concerns and problems kind of over and over again, but we do have a few new ones too. So there's a few new things sprinkled in with the old, but we'll get right into it because I know that first right of refusal is a thing again. You want to just do it?
I think you.
What's
Touch
that?
the screen or I can hold it.
Okay, all right, here we go. So, so first right of refusal is, of course, for those of you that don't know, and most of you do, is what happens when, in many instances, when we have a contingent offer. So, I know in new construction, Jamie can attest to this, it happens fairly often when houses are kind of in the process of being done. So it's applicable to new construction, it's applicable to existing homes. It's kind of a thing again now that if we have a house on the market. Now, if Jen Manhart was here, God love her, she would tell you, God, I never take them, like I avoid them like the plague. It's like too many layers of problems and I just don't want to take that exposure on. And of course, not every house is created equal. So if you have a $300,000 cream puff on the edge of Dundee that you know is going to sell in a day, maybe you're inclined to take a contingent offer on that versus, you know, a mud house that's 4.3 million on the edge of Gretna or something. You know, so we have to be considering those things when we are considering whether we're going to take a contingent offer, which you all know. The real key to it is, though, is that we want it to be comprehensive. We want it to anticipate all outcomes, and it needs to be specific and stay in constant communication with what's going on. So we have to be an educated listing agent when we're entertaining them. We need to know exactly what the circumstances are. And what's the first question that we ask the buyer's agent when they send over a contingent offer? Who's going to win the $50 gift card? What's the first question we ask?
I usually ask for the address.
Okay, that's a great
That's
one.
my first question, and our builder actually looks at it. Like they'll drive by it, if it's local. I mean, because it's just a risk. It's like a risk
They'll evaluate it. That's a good answer. That's one right.
Maybe that's not right. I don't know.
Well, no, that's a right answer. I'm looking for another answer. What is the
pending?
The contingency.
if it's pending? That's another good answer.
They
that-
get approved without it.
Ding, 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 ding.
Good job.
Okay, so
Teacher's pet.
sometimes people are just asking because they don't want to. So the question that we ask is, right, is it a wish or is it a necessity? Because and if you push back, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. They're fine with it. They'll release the contingency. If you have a multiple offer situation, amazing how all of a sudden they have the ability to do it. So when that happens, what's the first thing we do? Call the lender to make sure that it's not bulk that they can do, right? So that's another consideration that we have to always think about, is whether they can actually do it. True story, arbitration case, somebody came in, wrote contingent, said, oh, we'll release the contingency. Release the contingency because the seller countered it, right? They wouldn't accept it. Buyer said, fine, it was released in the contract. Buyer doesn't perform, comes back and says, hey, actually, just kidding, a week before closing, I can't close on the house without selling my house. Presumably, right, you're like, hey, it was countered, this is boilerplate, right? Boilerplate. How could anybody suggest otherwise, right? It's been understood that they were gonna be able to buy this house without selling their house. We have a pre-approval letter that says that. Obviously, we have a specific performance issue. This buyer is in hot water, the seller is inclined, and they go to arbitration and the buyer wins. Now, I would say a bad ruling, okay? But the second piece of information is, in order for you to be in an absolute preserved position there, you need to write in the contract, in the counter, in the event that the buyer is unsuccessful in closing due to their home sale contingency that they have waived, they have violated the terms of this contract or this purchase agreement. So you want to be sensitive to that, because otherwise the argument, the overarching argument was you never negated their financing contingency. So the aggregate financing contingency prevailed, right? Versus that one stipulation. So the attorney who serves as the arbiter said, yes, I get it. Everything you said is true. They might be horrible people. They might be dishonest. They might be all those things. But because the contingency in that paragraph, that is the financing contingency, because there wasn't language that specifically addressed that, it did not meet that standard. So the buyer won. So just be sensitive to that. Another thing that happens a lot in first right of refusals is it doesn't address what happens in the event. So it says, look, it's on for 48 hours, 72 hours, right? And then it doesn't suggest what happens in the event that the buyer's home falls out of contract. Okay? It doesn't address that specifically. So I always encourage you, and we have this document that we're going to send with you. I don't want to get into we're trying to kind of get through a lot of things. So I've got that. I think Audrey, you printed that. That's in the packet. So you can kind of see the case study on that. But the one thing that I don't believe that addresses, that we've kind of evolved on, and I need to rewrite it, and I will, is that you need to be cognizant of what happens if their property falls out. So what I would encourage you to put in the language is, in the event the purchaser's property that is for sale currently, that is contingent on this sale, falls out of contract, that this purchase agreement is voidable or cancelable in the seller's sole discretion. So that you're not held ransom for that, because presumably if the closing date then is 3 or 4 weeks later, they could have that 3 or 4 weeks and then 14 days on top of that, right? And so that's a huge issue. And that's one that people miss, and their sellers go berserk, right? Because ultimately they're held ransom for another 30 or 40 days and they have nothing. So that's the really big one that I want you to consider with first rights of refusal. Is there anything anybody else would like to share in regard to first right of refusal that they've thought about or used, or that's been successful for them that?
Yeah, I talk about the earnest deposit, what happens with the earnest deposit in that. And then making sure it's in the MLS for,
Correct.
you gotta make sure you do that. But I think the earnest deposit, and to your point, try to troubleshoot anything that you can see with that specific buyer. That could be any issue.
Right.
Right, whether it's the earnest deposit, what happens with the seller of their home, what happens if their buyer is denied financing. I mean, there's plethora of stuff.
A myriad of. The other thing that's in the document, thank you for that, jog some great points that Kristen makes about different semantics that you want to be concerned about. The other thing I would tell you is, I'm a big believer in trying to have them have skin in the game. So none of this, all timelines start when their contingency, is released. I say, if you want to have a home inspection or if that's been negotiated, it should happen immediately. Earnest deposit should be deposited immediately. None of this, we'll kind of wait and see, because if they're not willing to spend $500 on a home inspection in advance of that, and you're supposed to give them access to your $600,000 asset, probably not a good trade-off, and maybe says something about how inclined this buyer is to really make this happen. So, and what the list price is gonna be, right? What, on the property, what, you know, what their expectations are, you know, talking to the buyer's agent about all those things are super critical.
Even putting deadlines, their house is supposed to be on the market by X date, by
Correct.
this agent, it needs to be under contract by this date, if it's not under contract by this date, this happens.
Right.
You just gotta.
We do that on our new ones,
Yeah,
like very specific dates, like
Yeah.
it needs to be listed within 10 days.
correct,
Licensed realtor, blah, 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 and then.
Yeah.
right.
Personal photos.
And that case study kind of alludes to all those things. So I encourage you, if you haven't done contingent offers, to review that case study again. It touches on many of those things, but those are great reminders and great points. So thank you. Misty, you have something?
And on the pre-approval letters, just make sure that when you're told that it'll be approved with both houses, it should say not subject to the sale of current property. You know, I mean, people
Great point.
don't look for those little things, but that's one thing you really should be looking for.
I've had a weird one, and it's an out of state, it's Rocket Mortgage this week. Of course, this is happening this week. And it was scheduled to close on the 15th. And the bank all of a sudden said their property has to be pending before they will allow them to close on the new one. They don't have to close on it, but it has to be pending.
Wow, that's
Wow.
interesting.
I've never, ever had that, and
Never
I
seen
didn't
that
even
either.
believe it at first, like, we wouldn't have believed it, cause at first the homeowner was kind of like, well, and even told the agent, cause it's out of state, you know, well, we just wanna wait and close in June. And, you know, so we're like, no.
Right.
And so the guys were like, you need to pay this to hold the house or whatever, we're not gonna just hold it for another month. Well, then the agent said she did some more investigation, and it's actually the bank saying that, and they sent me the official letter, and it says right in there.
Interesting.
That is super weird,
And
because
I don't
Fannie
think
or
it's-
Freddie is black and white.
Yeah,
You
do-
have to either to exclude the payment or include the payment.
Yeah, and
For
it's weird
approval.
because it's something to do with their funds, like, they worded it like the release of their funds. And it's a relocation, I think. So.
That might have something to
That's
do
the
with it.
relocation, that's the key that they can do that, so I don't know, but the agent isn't getting back to me,
Yeah.
so I need to find out for sure. But the way I was reading it was like,
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So most likely Rocket has a
Because in
relationship
order
with.
for the buyer to receive the relocation package,
Right.
oftentimes their personal home has to be under contract
contract.
before the relocation will.
Why would they give me a pre-approval letter saying that the house didn't have to sell up front?
Because it's very likely that that buyer negotiated something different with their relocation and their company. 'Cause
And the seller didn't get with the relocation manager. Or the seller and your buyer didn't get with the relocation manager and the lender to work out that nuance, but that's exactly what it is. You're right. They have a requirement for the release of funds that property is pending. That's part of their relocation package. So that would be specific to that. but
I
that's-
just need to know, I'm gonna call her
It's a
today.
wonderful case study though.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call her today and get some more details, just so that I know, because she never mentioned relocation. She, you know, she just said they don't have to sell to buy, basically. She didn't give me a lot of details, but I'm gonna get some more, so I know.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate you saying that. Okay. Go to the next slide. I think. Escalation clauses, okay. So you guys know how crazy I am about these. So again, please, as the seller,
A couple people, put some questions in.
okay,
chat.
all right, let's go.
What do you do if the buyer's house accepts an offer, then also has a home sale contingency?
Thank you.
She said she writes in that does not release the first right from April.
So I appreciate that. That's so important. I'm terribly sorry I missed it. I write right in there that they can't accept a home contingency. That is a violation of the terms of this contract. You do not want it contingent on another one. God, it's bad enough the first time. That's like going to the well. What's that? What do they say that? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Like that is bad. I always put in, thank you. Such a great question. I always put in that they cannot accept another offer that's contingent on the sale of their property. That would violate the tenet of this purchase agreement.
Right,
So-
and then there was one more for Matt Harper. We had a deal, we took away the following away with the 24 hours first right. Appraisal had to be ordered within 48 hours. Earnest deposit within 48 hours, all instructions completed within 5 days.
Right.
Okay.
So basically what he's saying is he wanted them to have skin in the game, which is kind of what we discussed earlier, which I think is really important because you can get a sense of the seriousness of the client if, meaning the buyer, if they actually have to participate in not only behavior, but financial behavior. So, but so important, please do not accept best practice, in my opinion, please do not accept a contingency from the buyer selling their house that's buying your house on contingency. Bad, bad, bad. Too many dominoes. Bad game of dominoes. Just tell your seller, we don't play dominoes. Bad, bad, bad.
Now,
So-
this document is also in the chat in Zoom.
Okay.
Adding it.
Okay, so escalation clauses, we've talked about this at nauseum, but it's so important. If you are a buyer, it is a great tool. If that seller will give you that seller or that listing agent will give you last look, take it. It's a terrible policy, it makes no sense, makes no business sense, and here's why. If you're 5-on-1, why would you give them the upper hand to get last look? It's all it is last look. Why would you give, particularly if you have 3, 4, 5 offers, why would you stipulate to the terms that the buyer and the buyer's agent are providing you? Why wouldn't you always go back and ask for highest and best? There's no reason to not. Yeah.
So even before I get to that point, the way I weed these out most of the time is I ask them that if we accept their offer, can they pay the difference in appraisal gap? And 90% of the people have never discussed that or never proven that they have the money to pay the appraisal gap. And most will say, oh no, it still has to appraise. So as far as I'm concerned, that's not even an escalation clause. That's just a number on a piece of paper.
That's a great point. What I always try to do is I try to make sure that I just tell them point blank. Now, here's the problem with the escalation clause. Practically speaking, beyond the fact that it's not going to get your seller the highest amount, right? The second piece of it is it's never been litigated. Is that escalation clause, does it escalate off their escalator or does it escalate off the purchase agreement? An escalator is not a bona fide purchase price. That it doesn't say in the purchase agreement, oh, this is the escalator, this is the purchase price. I would argue that if you use an escalation clause and you don't counter the price in the actual contract, that they could make an argument that they're escalating on the highest base price, not the escalated price. So it hasn't been litigated that I'm aware of, but it's a real problem. That's number 2. Number 3 is, at the end of the day, if you think about it, I'm going to give you an example. We had a house in Happy Hollow. We had 7 or 8 offers. It was 2022 when things were hot. It was listed at $850,000. We had an escalation clause to $950,000. And we went back and asked for highest and best. And we got a bunch of them cluttered around $950,000, believe it or not, $100,000 over. When we went back to highest and best, somebody had just lost a big house in Happy Hollow, a doctor that was coming with their family, 2 doctors that were coming from Boston, where houses are presumably a lot more money. They wrote $1.05 million. If I would have, and it appraised, I don't know how. And so if I would have sat there and said, oh yeah, we'll take your 5,000 over the highest $950, we would have gotten $955,000. So I would have left $95,000 on the table for that stuff. So now, if you have 2 offers, it's a little dicier. You've got to really kind of massage it and play nice in the sandbox. And what I always tell the buyer's agent is, look, you're right there. The seller we have escalation clause upon escalation clause. Because that's usually true. You usually have all these escalation clauses that are closed and what have you. I say, look, we can't escalate off the escalation. The seller just wants a clean offer that they can sink their teeth into. And if there are close, I would say, you are so close. And they love that, right? They think, you're so close, you're right there. Hang in there with me. You've got a good shot. Just give me your highest and best. But you're today, because I don't have the other highest and best, you're right there. You're competitive. I don't know how it's going to look 5 minutes from now when I get the other people's highest and best. So I have full disclosure, but right now you're right there. And I'm going to tell you, I've gotten very good feedback with that set of talk track, because what happens is that, you want to get market share. What happens is that then they get their competitive juices going, and then they call their clients saying, we're right there. And we don't want to, you don't want to lose it over another five. I don't want to lose it over 5,000. Well, then maybe we take our escalation to 255 from 250, and we'll just write 255. What difference does 5,000 make? We want engagement. The minute we get engagement, we're going to get the highest off. That's just the way it works. God, Gaurav, you're just, everything is all the, whatever works for Mark these days. All right. I wouldn't be rude to Mark if I didn't like him. Okay, so he doesn't probably care about that, Rousey, right about him. Okay, so escalation clauses. Any more thoughts on why we always go for highest and best? And then we always counter the escalation clause out. Here's how we do it. We put a diagonal line through the escalation addendum, if it's not written in paragraph 10. Diagonal line, no signatures. Let me repeat, no signatures, no signatures. Never a signature on the escalation clause. Diagonal line. In the counter, purchase price to be $255,000. Escalation clause is not a part of this contract, with not in capital letters. Escalation clause addendum is not a part of this contract. Okay, and that's how you get yourself in a get out of jail free situation on that. Trust me, we've been in one, and it's not pretty, and it was a lot of money, and it was a big problem. It is not enough just to counter the purchase price. Let me repeat that. It is not enough to just counter the purchase price. You need to void the escalation clause. And one way to do it is to put a diagonal. Don't ever let your client sign the escalation clause. Now, if you're a buyer's agent, hell yes, if they're stupid enough to give you last look, take it. You know, take it. It's a good utensil on the buyer's side. So many buyer's agents are like, well, I have to work with this. No, it's a term. It's no different than a closing date. It's no different than the price. It's no different than an inspection. It is a term. We are not obligated to work with an escalation clause. But there are agents out there, because listing agents have worked with them so much, that you have to educate and you have to massage. You can't say, I have 13 offers, whatever, give me your highest and best, I don't care. I don't say that. I go to the top ones and I say, look, you have a competitive offer. We're asking for highest and best. The seller would prefer this closing date. Obviously, the cleaner the offer, the better. I never say, please, if you want an inspection, that will void your offer or it won't be under consideration, because you don't want to set your seller up for a potential lawsuit, because that would not look good if then the basement floods the next day and they pull up the carpet and there's signs of where there was water intrusion before, and it looks like you didn't want them to have an inspection because you were trying to hide something. So you never say, I don't want a home warranty. You never say, just say, seller is looking for your highest and best offer. The cleanest offers will likely prevail. Clean doesn't mean that you're not asking for an inspection. They know what it means, but never put in writing. And I highly encourage you not to put in your counter no inspection. I encourage you to negotiate that and have them rewrite the contract without that provision in it. So, because you don't want to set yourself up, and it's a one little extra step that can allow you to not be vulnerable. Does that make sense? We good on escalation clause? I know you guys are sick of me talking about it. We good on it? Okay, next, let's go. What do we got? Oh, home inspection authorization. So this came up. For many of you know that when the contract was redone like 20 months ago or whatever, we talked about it a little bit the other day in the new agent training. We went away from just a whole house inspection and went to what we call a due diligence period. But what somebody astutely said in that meeting is that they don't call it a due diligence period. It's just a home inspection and investigative evaluation period, I think is the terminology that's used. So if we want to limit the timeline, so here's the biggest thing I'm seeing. Buyer's excited, gets right in there, under contract, day one, home inspectors through the house, day two, they have their request, and now they're sitting there. And they're waiting for the seller to respond. And the seller doesn't respond, and we're on the 5th day, and then we're on the 7th day, and then we're on the 9th day, and another house popped up. And they're like, oh my God, we want to write on this house, but we don't want to write on that house if we're gonna, if we, we don't want to necessarily do that because we don't want to, what if the seller signs it, sends it right back to us, and then we're caught, in a bad game of chicken here between two houses. So what this does is it does two things. For a seller, it allows you to limit the amount of inspections that you could have. Now, realistically, we know how this worked in the old days. They can have a home inspection and they can say, okay, well, we have slow draining. So slow draining in the plumbing. So we want a sewer scope. And then what are you going to say, right? You could say, and they say, well, if you're not going to let us do the sewer scope, we're going to cancel. So 9 times out of 10, what's the seller? Okay, let them do the sewer scope, right? So it's not foolproof, right? It doesn't mean that the astute buyer's agent can't negotiate additional inspections. I think maybe moreover, what it does is it affords both the seller and the buyer to abridge the that due diligence period, because it can go the other way, right? I've had it go the other way where a buyer, sets what they want, the seller gets back to them right away, and then there's a few nuanced things, and the buyer just kind of drags their feet, and drags their feet, and drags their feet, and drags their feet. And the other thing that people don't like about it is then on the 18th day, it is canceled by virtue of the fact that there hasn't been an agreement on the home inspection. So you need to remember that the home inspection actually, if there's a home inspection and it's not, they're not signing off, we used to call it A, but they're not signing off taking the house as is. Used to be A, B, and C. Now it's not that anymore. That's for the old people. Old people know that. They're smiling. And if they're not smiling outwardly, they're smiling in their minds. But so you just, if that doesn't happen, then and there's not an agreement once that inspection resolution with the following repair requests are made, then by virtue of contract law, that thing expires and it's dead. So a lot of people don't like that on the buy side because they're like, well, gosh, we didn't really even get a chance to take it as is because we weren't afforded that opportunity because it expired. So I can see both arguments. It's kind of fair because it levels the playing field, right? Either party, it's a negotiation. It's a bit of a game of chicken. But it can void, maybe the seller doesn't want to let it get because they don't want to go back on the market. So it probably is the most fair way, but from a buyer's agent's perspective, people don't like it because they would like to hear, okay, yes or no, or okay, sorry, just kidding. I guess I don't need the siding replaced. I'll take it, but they're not afforded that right the way the new agreement is written. So I just want to make sure that people remember, because this kind of, as the market has kind of gone more into equilibrium, this has become not as big a thing because sellers can't really mandate like they were when this thing kind of came out and was in vogue, when we had a super robust sellers market. So just know that this document's there and know that you have the opportunity to limit those timelines. And we should be discussing this with the seller. I probably had 4 in the last month where people were like, oh, I forgot about that. And oh, now my seller's pissed off because they have to, this buyer's had this and now they're asking for every single little thing under the sun to come look at. And we got nothing because we have to wait another 9 days because they have that due diligence opportunity. So if you want to abridge that, you need to utilize this. And you don't have to utilize the timelines in that. You can write an addendum that is, that doesn't necessarily follow that fill in the blank if you're so inclined. So just remember that this is a resource and it's available to you, and that you should use it when it's appropriate. You should be providing it to your sellers as a utensil. You should be providing it to your buyers if they want to be more competitive and they think it affords them the opportunity to be more competitive. So anything on inspection authorization form that anybody like.
Yeah, no, so there's a large company in town that trains their agents not to have any sort of inspection addendum on their offers when they come in. Because they are taught that way it leaves the seller or the buyer more options in the inspections, but also listing agents don't catch to what Tom's talking about the limitations that we can add. So as a listing agent, you can counter back and add this into the contract with that particular company or those agents. And then they also kind of do the slide when there is a multiple offer situation that, oh, well, they don't have an extra addendum knowing darn well that they've got those 18 days.
Right.
So just it's.
Yeah, you have to, you kind of have to be cognizant of the timelines. You have to be cognizant of, what that means. Essentially, it's a game of chess. We've got to get better at, and we all do, I do too, at not just relying on the pre-printed forms, but thinking about, not necessarily practicing law, but pragmatically thinking about, okay, what's 2 steps down the path here? How can we be vulnerable, or how can our seller be vulnerable? And thinking through that. So this is another utensil or item to be utilizing. Any other thoughts on this before we move to the next?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, of course.
So I typically don't use this form if I'm representing the buyer and I have a lot of times, like if we're in a multiple offer situation, but my client isn't willing to give up the inspection, we'll squeeze that timeline, but I write it into box 10.
That's fine.
What do I need to include in box 10 for the remaining terms of the inspection portion of the purchase agreement?
So great question. So you could say something like this. You could say, kind of go back old school like it used to be. You could say something like, purchasers shall have all inspections, investigative, you would probably just say inspections because you wouldn't want to scare the hell out of them by using the word investigative, because that sounds like you're gonna give the house a colonoscopy. So you probably wouldn't say that. So I would just say, we'll do, purchaser shall perform all inspections, or you could say an evaluations, but I'd probably just say inspections prior to it within 5 business days, and provide results to the seller by the 5th business day. And then you could go on to say, and seller shall respond to that request within 3 business days. Or 2 business days, or whatever is appropriate.
Okay, so I get that part.
Yeah,
Do I need to have all other terms of 18 point of the inspection
yes, I would.
remain the same?
Yes,
Okay,
I would say, yes, for belt and suspenders. Now technically, if it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with that financing contingency, technically, that's why it's so important. I want to say this differently. This is kind of an aggregated thing, but it's really important because I kind of got kicked in the teeth. No provision in the contract is canceled unless it is explicitly stated in an addendum or in language that would substantiate that. So common sense would say, that would, well, for example, if you said something more punitive, like we'll take the financing contingency. If you said something like, in a financing contingency, like bank approval to be provided within 5 business days of accepted offer, and in the event that once that letter of approval has been established, in the event that the seller or the purchaser does not close due to no fault of the seller, their earnest deposit shall be provided to the seller, and this this purchase agreement is canceled, hereby canceled. Other thing that you want to be specific about on language is the 14 days. So you could write in your counter, closing date to be on or before May 15th. The provision, whichever paragraph that is, provision, 14-day provision in paragraph whatever is hereby canceled. So you're not stuck with that, because if you don't write that, so we just had one, it says closing to be on or before May 15th. And our person was hell bent, it says on or before, it says on or before. I'm like, it does. But it doesn't go on to address the paragraph that says 14 more days. And because you didn't address that specifically, that particular clause would still prevail. Common sense would say otherwise. Common sense doesn't matter in contracts. What the contract says matters. So you have to be, if there is language that is germane to what you're trying to accomplish, you need to go to that paragraph and read it specifically and make sure that your language is going to protect your client in the event that somebody tries to play games with the intention. So does that make sense? Did we get there? Okay.
I have one more question.
Yes.
So some of these boxes seem redundant, a little bit,
Sure.
full house inspection and then furnace air, like, do you check all of them that you want?
So it's a really good question. I think probably is a little bit poorly written, and so that's on me. But what the whole house inspection, the intention is that you take a whole house inspection, and we should probably have, let's make a note of this, guys. We should probably have that stand alone and then have those boxes and say, or other, and then you go down and you can pick. That's the intention of it, but it isn't, to Sally's point, I think I thought about that the other day when I was reading it, so it's funny you say that. It is a little bit confusing, that there would be redundancy theoretically. Okay, anything else on that? Great thoughts, appreciate that. Okay, good on that? Use it, don't use it? How many have used it? How many think it worked? How many confuses the living hell out of the buyer's agent and they come at you with a knife, a gun, and a belt? No?
That's why I started writing it into 10
Because it confuses
when I
them.
first started using it was confusing for them, so I'm just
Yeah.
like, I'm just gonna write it.
And I think if you're gonna get specific on timelines, it may be smarter to just write it in 10 because you can do that. If you're gonna talk about inspections, you probably wanna use it. And you could theoretically use, this sounds a little bit, I don't know, obtuse. But you could certainly say, use the inspection portion and then put a diagonal line through the dates and then address that in the paragraph 10 if you want.
I think the real confusion comes with the second page of it.
Yeah.
With the dates and the times.
Yeah,
I pretty much do that like within 10 business days and then two for the rest of them.
yeah,
So everybody has 2 days to respond to everything.
right.
Because that's where I think most of the
People
confusion
get
comes from.
confused.
Yeah.
We might in another setting go through that again, just so everybody can talk about it. Anything else on that? We're just trying to get through a bunch of this stuff. How are we doing on time?
It's 12:43.
Okay, we got to keep moving. Okay, multiple offer best practices. So we talked about this a little bit, but it really is important to make a spreadsheet. It's so easy in Excel to just make a spreadsheet, go down the categories. If you don't have it, I know Sheila, you have one that we could share. I know a lot of you have them. So if you don't have a spreadsheet with all the categories, send an email or text or whatever, and we'll get you one. But really, it's so much better, particularly if you're on a call and you're not with them. If you don't have a spreadsheet, if you're on a call, you just can't do it without, in my opinion. You gotta have it. So you just make the spreadsheet on one column, of course, you have every category, title company, any sort of escalation clause, your closing date, obviously the price, the financing, just everything that everybody knows. And then you have, on the other vertical, you have, the offer company, the agent, yada, yada. So, and you just have to have it because it's so much easier for your people to visualize what they're up against. And then you can go through each offer and they can see it and then you can say, well, this is a little bit nuanced and we should talk about this. But if they have it in front of them, it's so much easier. So please, please, please always do a spreadsheet. We talked about escalation clauses. We talked about highest and best. Also, when you're going through it, price isn't everything, make sure that they know every single detail, make sure they know that, hey, this person is concerned about this weird thing that they wrote in, it could be, oh, they want, they want, review of the covenants, acceptable review of the covenants. And it's like not a big deal or whatever, but you're like, ooh, red flag, these people are crazy, That, not that everybody that wants to review covenants are crazy. That came out wrong, but they would be crazy. So you just want to make sure that there's not some really weird nuance that is going to affect your ability to get to the closing table. And if that's the case, what I always try to do, if that's like the best of the best, then, oh God, it's hard. But like, let's say we're on a Sunday, then that Monday morning, I might be like, hey, we're gonna, and it's hard sometimes because you gotta go back and say, oh, we're gonna need until noon, which people go freak out, especially if you have like 10 of them. But if that's the best one, I would say, hey, you review the covenants. We're not gonna take that as a contingency. You review them, you're either in or you're out, because that's way too obtuse. To let 9 offers go away, presumably that's one's within a couple $1,000s. If I got 785 and I'm listed at 760, and I have 783 with this one and 785 with this one, and they're gonna review the covenants, I'm taking 783 every time. So you just wanna be sensitive to those things and make sure that you're discussing with your clients. What I always say to people is, would you trade 3,000 for 800? Because that's what's happening. If you have 100% or 90, nothing's 100%, but if you have a 98% probability that this one's going to close at 783, and you have 82% feeling that this one's going to close at 785, that old adage, this is old people's talk, but the old adage of, bird in hand is better than two in the bush. You can't put it in, and as our markets become in equilibrium, you can't put enough of a priority on that thought process, because you want to be the absolute hated listing agent. Let them walk away over $1,500, and then 120 days later, when they're getting 30,000 less. Anybody been? I love that conversation. It's so fun. I mean, like and they're like, well, you should have told me. And we can't tell them what to do, but we can certainly lead a horse to water. You can get them right close to that trough, can't you? Without telling them what to do. So that's a really important that they see all the exposure. And I say this is unscientific, but I give levels of probability based on experiences that I've had, that this is very likely could be the scenario. I would say 8 out of 10 times this could happen. And obviously that's an experience thing, and you have to have the volume of the transactions. But I really get into, so this is unscientific. These are not data points. This is my gut based on experience, but I do have a feeling that this could occur. And we owe them that. We owe them our honest impression. And then once they get the information, then they make a decision. We don't make the decision. We just provide all the information. And sometimes I think we are scared to provide it all because we think it might kind of taint their perspective. But if we feel strongly about it, and if we don't feel super strongly about it, then we can say, this is a consideration, but I don't necessarily know that this will be the outcome. Be candid, be honest, be sincere. That's all we can do. But we owe them that because they've hired us to be honest. So there's no shame in it. But at the end of the day, we have to say, we don't know, because we don't know. It's our best guess. And we have to couch it that way. But we want to make sure that we're honest, and because that's what they're hiring. If we're not there to tell the truth, then they can hire anybody to tell them what they want to hear. So, okay. Any thoughts about multiple offer best practices that anybody wants to talk through? Good on that? Okay. Next. Okay, wholesalers. Whew. This became a thing. So Nebraska statute states that in the event that you are going to transfer equitable title in a property, in order to market that equitable title, you have to be a licensed real estate salesperson in the state of Nebraska and/or a licensed broker in the state of Nebraska. Now, what the hell does equitable title mean? Good question. Equitable title means that particular client, and it could be the wholesaler or they could be working for a client, that particular client has a signed and executed purchase agreement and has interest in that purchase agreement. that they have the ability to assign through a provision in the purchase agreement. So you go as a wholesaler, you get a property, it's 140,000, you call your client, you're a licensed realtor, you call your client, hey, we can get this for 140,000. Get under contract for 140,000. Client says, hey, realtor, licensed salesperson, I want you to see if you can get me 170,000. I don't really want this house and I think there's a lot of equity in it. They have the ability to do that. Okay, you can't put it in the MLS. There's no mechanism for that. GPR MLS voted on it. They don't want it. I think that's wise, by the way, because imagine having 2 signs in the yard. It's a disaster. But you can do that, right? Okay. So here's what's happening on the street, unfortunately. Just got one yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. There are some wholesalers, and this particular person, I'm not going to call names. Not going to call them, I'm not going to call the real estate commission. I'm going to call them after it closes because I believe it's about education. It's about playing nice in the sandbox. This is to the point where I think it's very problematic and I think it's dishonest. I have a big issue with it, but I don't know that that was their intention. What they're doing is they're trying to get buyer's agents to sign up as consultants. So what they're saying is they'll pay you 2.4% as a consultant. And then they have a document that you fill out that says, you're not going to turn it into your brokerage paperwork. You're not working as a real estate person. You're not doing all these things. And presumably the inducement is, hey, they don't have to pay the split, you know, that you get a little more money. Maybe that's enticing people to do it. Here's the problem. I really don't care about the money that much. That's not the reason. I mean, sure, we like to get paid for stuff that runs through the brokerage because we have overhead and what have you. My real concern is that if that goes to pot, like that buyer gets mad at you and they go to the real estate commission and you took a commission, they're going to look at that and go, a consulting fee of 2.4%, but it didn't have to do with the procurement of that house. Come on. They're going to be like, you circumvented the system so you didn't have to work through the confines of the law, right? Second thing is, goes to pot, they get pissed off at you, you did something wrong, your E&O insurance doesn't cover it because you weren't under your licensure. So for the 1 deal or 2 deals or 3 deals, for the $800 you're gonna have to pay, just don't do it. It's not about money, it's really about just protecting your interest. And make sure that you're not doing a deal with a wholesaler that's marketing with equitable interest or equitable title unless they're licensed, because that's what the state says. So just be sensitive to this. There's one big player that's got this document. Basically, he sends it over and it's a consulting agreement. And it basically says, you know, you get 2.4%. You can't, this is not a brokerage transaction. You can't share it with broker. It has a confidentiality provision. I mean, it's not, it's just not good. It's not good. So we're working through one right now. And, you know, of course, our buyer's agent's scared that it's going to screw the deal up. So we're figuring it out. I think I got it figured out, but it's not good. Just don't do it because it just makes you so vulnerable. And you think about it, where's your greatest vulnerability? They're assigning the contract for 130 and they're paying 170. And then they wake up the next day and think they got taken. And then whose fault is it? And oh, by the way, you weren't the buyer's agent. And by the way, you have a buyer agency agreement signed with them and you have an agency disclosure signed with them, but you weren't their agent. I mean, bad. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Next. Dual agency protocol. Okay. We talked about this a little bit in the conversation yesterday in the new agent training. We need to be very sensitive that when we're working with people that we think could be potentially our customers. So you get a sign call. Get a sign call, person comes in and they're like, oh yeah, I like the house. And you start talking to them about the house. Immediately at that point, you need to have an agency conversation with that person because they are likely going to think that they're your client. You have not, even if you've signed in the listing agreement and the seller said, I would participate in dual agency, until the seller signs that particular document, they're not bound by that. And if you start having conversations and that person gives you some sort of excited utterance like, I'll pay anything for this house. I don't want an inspection, I don't want anything. And then your seller says, oh, well, I don't really want you, I've been thinking about, I don't want you to be a dual agent, I kind of prefer that they be your customer. And now you've got to disclose what that person said, because theoretically, you have an established agency. You have to say, oh, well, they're only paying, and that particular client slash customer, whatever the hell they are, they have no idea that nuance. So the first thing you do is you identify agency. And I know it's awkward. You're like, oh yeah, this could be Susie's room, and you're like, and oh, by the way, I want to talk to you about agency. You know, but you do need to get it in. And what you can do is you can say, look, right now I work for the seller. So if there's anything that you think is in your best interest to keep private, until we've established our agency relationship, please don't share anything with me, because I want to protect your interests right now. And I don't know how this is going to go down, because we need to talk about agency. First, let's see if you're interested in the house, but if there's anything particular to your interest in the property that if I told the seller could damage you, please don't share it with me until we've established that. Because I've had it before where we haven't done that, and it's a big problem, because then theoretically, we have to disclose to our fiduciary, and we haven't adequately communicated what that means to that potential buyer. And the real estate commission will, dual agency is illegal in half the states for a reason. So you do not want to be put in the position where you have to defend your inability to explain, because they're going to say, well, you're supposed to provide the agency disclosure at the first practicable point of contact. And you're going to sit in front of the, I'll affectionately call it the kangaroo court in Lincoln. And they're going to say, well, yeah, no, glad you were here. And they're going to technically say, well, before you were talking about making an offer and things that wasn't practicable enough, so you're going to lose that argument. So you want to make sure that you have all that figured out in advance of their interest being articulated in a meaningful way. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Other thing is, when they are your customer, or if they're your client, you always follow up, particularly if they're your customer. Because I had this in Syracuse on an acreage, and I knew this lady was going to go after me. And so I could just tell, you get that feeling. And so after I discussed that she would be my customer, because there was no way I was going to be a dual agent, because I knew this lady she was going to come at me with a pitchfork. I just felt it. So I said, look, we talked about agency, and then I sent the document over to her, and I followed up with a very copious email, and it said, as you'll understand as the customer, this. The fiduciary, my fiduciary is to my seller. I work for the seller, this. So above ground pool, liner's leaking. She sends me this. I'm going to sue you. You didn't represent me, blah, 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 blah. And I just politely resent the email about how she was my customer, and magically it disappeared. So you always want to protect yourselves from the standpoint of agency, and articulate that as clearly as you can. Always a follow-up email saying, as you recall, we discussed, boom, 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 boom. Because they're not going to really care. They're thinking about the house, but they're sure the hell going to care when they think they can get something. Yeah.
How do you explain to the lender on the buyer's side that, let's say you had a listing coming up, and then the buyers you've been working with for a while or whatever. Well, anyway, you married the two up, but then you decided to do customer only, for example, but you got the buyers approved with the lender. How do you explain to the lender the customer only situation?
Well, I don't like that anyway. I don't think that's healthy, because you would de facto have an agency relationship with them if you were representing their interests, and you had a conversation as intimate as their financing. So I think if that were the case, I think you need to refer one of the two and work for one or the other, or you need to work dual agency. But if you have a relationship that's that deep where you've been showing this buyer houses, and so think about scenario, not that this would ever happen. You're showing a buyer houses, you've shown them 16 houses. Maybe you haven't gotten the agency disclosure signed yet, because maybe sometimes people get it signed at the time that they're actually writing the offer. That could happen, right?
Never.
Not best practice, full disclosure, not best practice, first practicable point, and this is why. But one thing, and here's the thing, when you gotta get the agency agreement signed anyway, so just get the disclosure signed at the same time, just do it. But in the event you didn't, de facto, there's an agency relationship there. You've talked intimately about their financing, about things that they should be concerned about in a house. I mean, that you have an implied relationship there. You can't, how are you not their realtor? You've shown them 16 houses. So that's another reason why you have to differentiate right at that particular point in time. And you have to tell your seller, look, I have this relationship with this buyer. I have de facto an agency relationship with them. I'm gonna either, and I get it, it's not fun, right? But if you could negotiate a more aggressive referral fee, maybe you get 50% if all they have to do is fill it out. And then you have that divide. Or if your seller is comfortable with it, you could do dual agency in that circumstance.
Let me rephrase then. Let's say you're doing open house on your own listing. Someone comes in, wants to write an offer. You explain customer only. They don't have a lender, they're not pre-approved. You get them in touch with your lender.
Well, I don't think I don't know why, just because you provided a vendor, that per se is an agency related issue.
Correct. So my question is how do you explain to the lender customer only?
Well, I mean, the lenders, presumably, if they've been in the business, they're gonna understand that, but really it's outside of their purvey. They just have to, first of all, even if you're their agent, there's certain things they can't disclose.
Right.
So really, it shouldn't matter with the lender. The lender should, be executing on their file. They have a fiduciary obligation to that client. They aren't technically allowed to share specific information about them, whether or not they're your client or not. So it shouldn't really be, I mean, unless I'm missing something.
No, we just had one where the only one agent was on the contract, so the underwriter was asking, who's paying the 2.4, and they just had a whole bunch of questions, because there was only one realtor on the contract, the listing agent, and I had the same agent in my system as the referral partner. So that's why they were asking.
Okay, yeah. Well, you definitely need to define how people are getting paid and what the buyer's responsibilities are, but I think that supersedes that's different than your fiduciary obligation. That's more of a semantics or
I've
logistics.
just never seen one in 30 years of where the buyer is the customer, and I thought there'd be a document or something for that, but
Well, there's an unrepresented buyer document in .loop.
It's different than the customer only on agency disclosure?
Correct, because you're looking at two different things. You have the agency disclosure, okay? And then under NAR, you have the buyer representative, right? And you have a buyer agency agreement, right? Disclosure, state of Nebraska, fiduciary, agency agreement, NAR, acknowledging compensation. There is an unrepresented buyer agreement in .loop that says you're not representing the buyer. And you can have that signed. Now, presumably, if you don't represent them, you really can't get paid. So in that instance, if you brought somebody into your listing and you're like, hey, you're my customer, you'd have them sign an unrepresented buyer, you put 0. Now that brings up a good point. In your listing agreements, you need to make sure that you put a provision in that says because technically now under the way it's written now, you have your listing compensation, and it used to be aggregated, right? 5%, 6%, 7%, whatever. Now it says listing agent commission and what they're going to pay the buyer agent. Now, what you need to go on to say in that agreement is what happens if there is an unrepresented buyer or if there's dual agency. Because technically, if it's an unrepresented buyer, you're not entitled to that commission. Now, it doesn't become an issue very often because people don't think about it. But if you had a savvy seller, they could say, oh, well, I don't have to pay you for that. They're an unrepresented buyer. So you need to make sure that if you intend to get compensation that is more than what your listing compensation is, that you document how that is going to happen in the comments section of your listing agreement, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. What else? Appraisal. Okay. So we had a great conversation the other day about appraisals. That appraiser name eludes me.
Lee Cranbeck.
Lee Cranbeck.
Lee Cranbeck was awesome. For those of you who we're here. I just step out a little bit, but I think most of you know these, but we'll just do a quick. Appraisals aren't transferable between lenders. I think everybody kind of knows that. Oh, rate. So this is a shout out to Misty and her group. Uses a platform of local appraisals, unlike some national companies use these AMCs, which means that they're just kind of sending it out for bid. Now, we're not saying that every national lender is terrible. We're just saying that, you know, the process is different, and they usually don't have a portal of local lenders that have been vetted. So,
Or even local lenders that use AMCs so
Correct.
that they can get the kickback from the pricing.
that's true too. So you might want to ask your lender partner. Rate does not do that. They have a portal of accredited lenders
Right.
that they don't double dip on.
Right.
But you might want to ask your lender, if you do have a lender that you work with, whether or not they're using AMCs or whether or not they're using, you know, like, there you go. That's Krista Luther's answer to everything. I like it. So at the end of the day, we just have to be sensitive to the fact that, you know, I would argue that I think we've got a better shot if we have a portal of accredited smart lenders, because we've seen some really obscure, bad appraisals lately that are blowing up deals. So it doesn't mean that every AMC file is gonna reach value, and every portal file is not, and vice versa. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean, AMCs are always gonna be bad. But I think it is nice to know that you have a lender that's been in business a long time, that has high quality appraisers that understand the industry and have actual knowledge of the neighborhoods, versus, it would almost be like, can you imagine this? Imagine if your inspector was just chosen out of a portal. Nobody would think that was good, right? You would say, oh, can you imagine? Not all inspectors are created equal. So why would it be any different with the appraiser? So that's you want, if you had like, for example, maybe if it was an inspection, they would have to be ASHI or ASHI. How do you say that, Chad? ASHI approved. Yeah. So that would be, but they don't really have to have any accreditation other than be, with the state. They have to be,
Right.
and they have to have their license, but they don't have to have any industry accreditation or what have you. So that's something that you want to be cognizant of. Okay, yeah, so value issues, we talked about packets. I think packets are great, if they're done correctly and respectfully and done well. They're valuable, and I think that appraisers that are comfortable in their own skin are happy to have that, because it gives them more resources in case there's something they missed. So I think it done well, it's preemptively, it's a good thing. I think we all agree with that. They can't consider, he says they can't consider, I think some might consider pending transactions. He said he does not. Certainly, actives don't mean anything. Pendings, I think technically they're not allowed to, I think according to their guidelines, they're not allowed to consider them. I think it can color their mindset and maybe make them closer to, dig a little deeper into their war chest. But he did say, which I thought was interesting, that sometimes they're waiting for a couple to close, so they're more current, and those would be valuable. He did talk about Freddie and Fannie wanting them to be only a few months old, while in markets like ours. I think my aha moment was, the reason that we're having trouble with appraisals right now is historically they could go back a year. Well, we have huge seasonality issues. If you look at the average sale price, we say it right, like when we're trying to drum up business in the winter, the best time to buy a house is December or January, right? Because that's when you're gonna get because that's nobody wakes up and says, I think I'll list my house on December 15th. Nobody wants to do that. Either it's lingering or it's a have to, right? So most cases. So prices, you get your best values in the winter. Well, if we're going back, if those things get under contract January 4th and they're closing, March 12th, and then he's going back 2 months and he's trying to get, something in Huntington Park that fire sold for 480 and he's trying to get 590 out of this one, their hands are tied, right? So that's a big problem. I think it's super flawed, but we're gonna have to be cognizant of it and make sure that we're digging deep. And even if you have to go a little further out, like let's say you have to get outside of Huntington Park, maybe you go into Linden Wood, that's an example. You wanna be able to give them the resources, because they're pragmatists too, right? They know the values there, they just have to be able to rationalize it in certain instances, right? So you gotta give them the resources to rationalize it. If they're only let them go back 3 months, then give them something in Lindenwood that's maybe a little bit out of scale, but the whole process was flawed to begin with, right? So if it's something that they have as a resource, then maybe they'll bite into that. I think you're good up to, it's supposed to be a mile, but I think right in there, you're probably pretty good. I mean, I've seen them before in luxury where I've seen them pull comps for Fair Acres out of Linden Estates. So,
Oh, yeah, we just
Yeah.
did ours we're just between Utan and Ashland, and they used, what's the Woodcliff in Fremont, they
Okay.
used, a few things in Ashland, but they also used one in Blair.
So be a little creative with that. Maybe push the envelope a little bit outside of, not ideally. I mean, if you're at 50th and Capitol and you've got one at, 50th and Nicholas, then great. But if you don't, then, and you have to get on the other side of Dodge, south side of Dodge, then take the one on the south side of Dodge, because.
They just had to be able to justify the reasons they made the changes.
Right.
I think something else that he said that is important was that we're used to seeing that 4% increase year over year, and he's really considering it just the last 2 years, only 1%. So I think that that's maybe where we're having some of the appraisal issues, is that we're still considering a higher percentage change.
Which I think is such a great point that Krista makes, because it speaks to the greater point about, remember when everybody said, oh, look at all the price decreases, let's say 18 months ago when all those price decreases, oh my God, look at all the price decreases. Prices are plummeting. No, it's just sellers' expectations were there and we weren't used to monitoring those expectations. We were just used to saying, yep, we'll get 6 offers. Well, obviously that's not the case, or hasn't been the case. So you need to be cognizant of that when you're listing a house. We didn't get into pricing strategy today, but I've always said the fastest way to 300,000 is to price at 275. The fastest way to 275 is to price at 300 if you have a house that's worth 280. So you want to be cognizant of doing that. If you have a house that's going to have a lot of demand, and that there's going to be a lot of demand, and it's a defined market, you should be at least 1 or 2% under the market. That's where you're going to get your greatest outcome. Very difficult to articulate to a seller that's been in their house for 38 years that thinks that people come and offer exactly 95% of the price every time. Hard to have that conversation. So that's why you need to bring in those comp sales of the people that were X like this on a price per square foot. And then we're able to get this versus somebody who started high and had to work the price down, but ended up maybe even lower than the one that started lower on a price per square foot, because you never get a second chance. I'm not in a hurry. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. That's the greatest line you can give. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. You never get to introduce yourself. You can cancel relist. It's not a reintroduction to the market. It's only a reintroduction to the market of the buyers that haven't been there, 2 days ago, essentially. So, or that will be there 2 days, and beyond. So is there anything else on that anybody remember anything from that they thought was valuable in that conversation? Is that the last one?
No.
Okay. Yeah, this is just, and I think we're past time, but great habits equal great results. If you do the same thing, whether it's good or bad every day, if you time block, no matter what that activity is, I don't care what it is, business development, personal well-being, getting your mindset for the day, whatever you do that is habitual, That muscle memory is an amazing thing. And it doesn't become work if you're just predestined to do it. If we try to reinvent the wheel every day, it's a lot of work. If we set it and replay it, that's what we do. Think about it. What's the most difficult habit to quit? Smoking. Smoking is so difficult to quit. They say it's harder than heroin to quit cigarette smoke. It's an incredibly difficult pattern, because it's habitual and the nicotine is addictive. If you work out every single day, people that do, you just get in the car and your car takes you to the gym, right? You don't even have to think about it. Think about your business that way. If at 9 o'clock you're at your home office, or you're here in your office, or you're here working in the common area, if you're doing that every day at 9 o'clock and you know that you're going to do that every day, whatever it is, it ceases to become work and it ceases to become a task. It just becomes ingrained in you. So I have really tried hard, and it comes very difficult for me because I'm a salesperson too. I'm like, ooh, shiny, new, coffee, pajamas, don't want to do it, maybe do it, I don't know. And we kind of take it what's in front of us. But if we can, the people that are disproportionately successful in this business are people that have those incredible people skills, but then can put a regiment to it. They are disciplined enough to put something in place, because the discipline ceases to be discipline when it becomes a habit. It's not discipline anymore when it's discipline at the beginning. But if you're trying to reinvent the wheel every day, you have to be disciplined every day. If you form a positive habit, it takes care of itself. The only way you can break the positive habit is by breaking the pattern. But the pattern's harder to break if you have established it and you know you're going to do it. On Monday, I go to the gym at this time. On Monday, I go to my office and I do these tasks, and I set my calendar every Sunday night. And these are the tasks I participate in. So I challenge you to challenge yourself, no matter what the discipline is, whether it's health, whether it's a hobby that you're passionate about, whether it's volunteerism, whether it's your business, form positive habits and execute on them. And you will find that the discipline is less important because you form the habit. So, okay, is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
It's like,
We kind of rushed through everything. I just thought it was good to get a reboot on some of this stuff. Is there anything else in the chat or anything?
I don't know.
For informational purposes, we didn't touch on.
Okay, yeah, I hate that. Don't ever do that. So for informational purposes only means nothing unless it has context. So that's kind of the buzzword for all phrases. Phrases don't mean any, remember when we were talking about going back to the particular provision in the contract that is germane to that specific topic? For information purposes only, people write that for inspections, right? Oh, for information purposes only. For whose information? The buyer's information? And what obligation does that have? Does that mean that they have to take the house? No, because you have paragraph 18 that says they still have an inspection. But your seller may think, oh, well, they're just having an inspection because that's what it says, right? For information purposes only. So don't use jargon that is generic in nature. If you're going to use a generic statement, you always have to support it with very detailed information. And you have to remember, like we went back to the beginning, every provision in the contract stands alone and has merit and is not voided or removed unless it is specifically identified. So if you want to say, what's better to say is purchaser shall ask no repairs of the seller. However, they have the rights afforded them in paragraph 18.2 or whatever. You want to make sure that you're specifically identifying what it is that you're trying to give rights to or take away from. And as a seller, you want to do it too, because you're like, you don't want to try to play gotcha with that stuff and say, well, I could construe it this way, I'll outsmart everybody. Because here's what happens. Everybody loses when that language isn't precise. And the reason that everybody loses when the language isn't precise is because it's never worth litigating. So you look like an idiot because you're right and you can't perform on being right, right? Oh, we're right on that. Okay, that's great. Then they call me, what are we gonna do to them? Nothing, because it's gonna cost $30,000 to arbitrate that. Oh, well, I guess we're gonna do nothing. Well, I should have known that we were gonna do nothing, so you wanna make sure that you get exactly living in the shadows on language when people think, oh, well, this is better for me. Like on first right of refusals on the buyer side, bigger the better. Not really, because then when there's a big fight, there's no expectation and both parties feel like they lost. Versus if there's a meeting of the minds and everybody understands what the consideration is, everybody wins. Because when there's conflict, and I know a lot of big producers in here, you know what happens. When there's conflict, everybody loses, right? Everybody loses. The agents lose, the clients lose, because the fact the matter, or they think they lost, right? Because we're not gonna litigate. It's a set, most issues are what? I'll guarantee you, most real estate issues are between $3,000 and $20,000. They're never enough to fully litigate. And so then they're horse trading. And people say, well, who wins? Nobody wins. You horse trade, because it's not worth. So you say, well, yeah, but I'd rather be in the stronger position legally. Fine. But there's not really any, the best position to be in is in the clear position. I'd rather be in a slightly substandard position and have it be clarified than I would be in a, than be in a position where I think I'm right. And then ultimately my client garners, because that's where clients get furious, because they're like, wait a minute, we're right. Why didn't you protect me? And you're like, well, the process won't, it's the economics of it won't protect you. It's not me that did protect the economics. So having an absolute clarity on everything in the contract is the absolute best circumstance. You get credibility with the other agent, you get credibility with your client. Nobody thinks, how many times do buyers walk because they say, I don't trust the seller anymore? All the time. The minute they lose trust in their agent or the seller, that is the biggest. They don't walk just because the house isn't quite right. They don't walk because, they change their mind. That happens. The biggest reason that they walk, first time home buyers walk, is because they get scared because they don't trust the seller. And the other piece of that final comment is our clients take on our personnel and their clients take on their person. If my client says to me, I want to strangle that son of a bitch, I'm going to run him over with my car. I say, my client's slightly disappointed because of this circumstance. I'm wondering.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, can you copy and paste the asshole text? No, don't do that. We are the professionals. Cooler heads prevail. And by the way, it's not our money. We'll give you $750. My guy's never going to take that. That's stupid, Clint. He's indicated that that's probably not where he wants to be on the project.
Right.
I'm happy to present the offer. I hope your client will be entertained account. Right? When people get all pissed off, 9 times out of 10, it's because we're prodding them. We think that makes us one with them. You know what that asshole agent said to me? They're not the pro in the day. They're our client. We're the pro. We get paid tens of thousands of dollars in certain circumstances, thousands in every circumstance to sell these out. We're the pro. We should not be, we need to make sure that we are filtering and protecting our clients from the emotional component of it. And that's really important. And you know what? When we have 7 offers on a property, and we're the people that are always reasonable and fair-minded and kind and trustworthy, our offer wins. I've had people come and call me and say, look, I'd rather work with you. Will you do $255? I have authorization from the seller.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you know what they say? You know what you say? I'll ask my client. They say they'll do $255. We'll get last look. If you're the person that says, my person's not going a penny under over $253, I don't care what you say. Your seller's an idiot. How many times you heard that? Your guy's a moron. He's a dumbass. That eventually that filters back. And so it's Nebraska nice, guys. It works. Just when you get agitated, I just try to hold the phone as far away as I can. And I count to 5, because I have a terrible temper. So I have to count to 5. I hold the phone away and I count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. Understand your client's concern on that, right? Because at the end of the day, we're only as good as we can get our clients to be. And if we can't get them in the right frame of mind, and we don't have that respect and admiration of that agent, we got a problem. So I know we do a really good job of that in here. We really do. And I hear it every day from other agents and brokers. They're like, oh, your people are always nice. They're always buttoned up. They're always honest. They're always trustworthy. That's great. But just let's make sure that our clients don't take on our frustration. If we're frustrated, we need to leave that at the door and make sure that we're communicating the things that are important to them. Not saying we hide anything, but there's a way to communicate, right? Okay.
Can I ask a question, just because so many people are here? Like you and Chad and Kristen and Jamie's out, but I'm showing houses, or I showed houses last night in Calarosa that have been hit by tornadoes.
Right.
So one is like $1 million property
Okay.
that has been rebuilt. What do I need to know, or what do we need to know, or what kind of documentation? Is it like buying a car with a salvage title? I mean, it's almost like a concern, like what was really destroyed in the house or what wasn't. I understand some, like with the Hildies, they've been taken down to foundation and started fresh. That I understand. But what about something that's like partially destroyed and rebuilt?
I think it's a great question. I think you're entitled to, and your client should be entitled to know exactly what the insurance claim entailed, exactly what was damaged. I would ask for all the reports related to the insurance claim, what they thought was salvageable, why they thought it was salvageable, whether or not they had a structural engineer evaluate the home, whether or not they had other contractors, whether or not the building pad was evaluated and the soil was determined to be buildable. I mean, I'm not trying to be like accusatory or weird about it, but
No, I'm really leery.
I think they need to be able, if they can demonstrate in good faith all those things and you're able to document it, then, then we'll speak to the devil.
Yeah.
But what do you think about that, Jamie? So the question was, homes that were hit by the tornado that maybe were half built. What if you were gonna ask about, and what would you ask if you were representing a buyer? If they tried to work from like, yeah.
So my
Personally, and this is just from what Ryan and Brian have taught me. So what happened with our houses, 25 of them were hit. They were under all various stages of construction. Most of them were done of those 25. They actually tore every single one down to the foundation, and then they hired an engineer, every single one, even the ones the insurance did not tell them they were damaging out. They tore them completely down to the foundation, and then they had the correct engineer, which I can't remember what kind it is, but whatever, come and actually give them a certificate that the foundation and all of that was stable.
See, and that's what
A structural engineer.
that's what I trust. So
We have the certificate. We've resold quite a few of them. I'm so proud of myself. Every time a tornado house sells, I'm like, yes. They do ask these hard questions, and I'm super honest about it. And we have only had one of the ones that I've resold, ask for the certificates from the engineer. But we provided it because it's a letter that basically says, I'm an engineer. I looked at this foundation after the tornado. It has pictures and stuff. It gives me goosebumps. But because that day is like still so fresh in my mind.
Right.
But and so I think that if I had a client that was gonna buy a tornado house that was brand new, at least, that the builder decided to salvage part of it, I would actually advise them that it's risky. It's very risky to purchase it.
yeah, my question was because of you guys, and then I'm showing.
I'm not gonna say who, but the guys witnessed people saving stuff that shouldn't have been saved. They were like moldy stuff, that like wood that was moldy, like things like that, because none of them were rebuilt quickly, and we got a ton of rain right after the tornado, and things were open, and so that's why the guys were like, forget this, we're not gonna be held liable for any of this later on, even if the insurance is saying keep the house, keep parts of it. They were like, we're terrible, no way. They've been in business long enough to know better than that. But there were a lot of resales of damaged houses that like fixer uppers were like fixing and putting back together, which I'd be scared to death to have my client buy those, honestly. I don't know.
That's really good. Thank you.
It's
for
just
that.
honest.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to throw like.
No,
a
that
company
was
under
the
bus,
question. I think it's a great,
but I would never in a million years let my family member or my,
yeah,
my client ride on one of those houses.
that's really
If
helpful.
I could stop them.
And if they did tear them down, I had a past client that the suction from the tornado lifted the roof up
Yeah.
an inch and a half. So I think getting the certificates from the engineers,
You need to do.
whatever,
Yeah.
you need to get all of that, you need to get all the documentation of what the insurance, and then also I would make sure that house is insurable and what the replacement cost of that is. Because whenever you have a damaged property, if the seller or the owner didn't do cause I mean, think about it, when we do just roofs.
Oh, yeah.
The seller will go, well, I've got a $10,000 deductible and I'm not gonna do that 10,000, but I'm gonna do everything else. So I mean, there's a lot of things you've gotta check and recheck, and then plus two, that tornado, it rained a lot then, and then 2 weeks later, it poured buckets, and so you've got foundations that have gotten water in them. I mean, there's a plethora of things that happen to those houses in that.
And there was a 2-story over there that I remember the guys talked about by a different builder that was just completely moved over. It wasn't moved off the foundation, but the whole house was just pretty much shifted. And they ended up tearing that one down, I'm pretty sure, but
Did you have any foundations though that were bad?
none of our foundations were totaled. And they were all looked at. Every single one was looked at by an engineer.
Pretty rare
So-
tornado effect.
Yeah, and
As long as the house is rebuilt with new material,
right.
I wouldn't be worried about it.
And that was the thing too, there was like some concrete that ended up getting damaged from the tear out. So they've had to do a bunch of epoxy floors. So if you go into one of our houses and the garage floor is epoxy, you know that it was because it was scratched from the skid loaders and all that, like the concrete scratch, which is just cosmetic, but we did epoxy the floors because people weren't gonna buy the house with it looking like that, so.
Were your houses priced the same then after?
They are. The guys priced them. I've been relisting them as they come and they're pricing them exactly the same. But that's still a mess because of sorting through insurance, and that's a whole nother conversation that we
Let's have
don't
another
wanna
one on
talk about, but
So to answer that, I got to sell the first Ramblewood house after it got hit by a tornado in the neighborhood. Because we were already gonna sell
Like
it,
the rebuild.
then the neighborhood hit, and then sold it, and we gave them everything. The buyers, we just gave them everything that they needed, whatever they asked for, because it was right after. I mean, I think it was literally within a month, after that hit.
Yeah.
That they had everything rebuilt, and luckily it wasn't fully destroyed, but new roof, pretty much everything new on the first floor, and then the basement was pretty much fine. But buyers asked a lot of questions and we gave them everything, but also that seller had another home under contract that was across the street from your guys' homes. Right over by the middle school over there. And so that one also got hit by a tornado. So they also reciprocated, they gave us everything. It wasn't a new build, but it was like a 3 or 4 year old house. And they gave us everything that happened to it and everything that got repaired. So I feel like you'll probably be fine asking for all those things. I don't see why anybody wouldn't want that to happen. But yeah, that was fun. I got to sell 2 tornado houses at the same time.
Yeah, that is.
So, yeah.
So that's what I tell the guys. I'm like, well, at least we know if a tornado hits.
Yeah.
We have a plan. We have a much better plan. I
Right.
don't know.
If you buy one of those then and you sell it in 5 years, you have to disclose then you bought a tornado house or something? I mean,
No, well, this is the way we looked at it, is they tore it down to a brand new foundation, like the entire house itself was tore down, so. But I think if it was salvaged, yeah, I mean, those seller property disclosures on the salvaged ones needs to have a lot of information.
We
But
have
that's my
pages.
advice, I don't know what Tom.
Well, I
on
mean,
that,
there's
like-
the hail, there's the hail provision. I would probably just put, even if it was found, I would probably put, in the abundance of caution, house was, damaged as a result of tornado or whatever, and it was brought down to its foundation and for, structural integrity reasons, and I would probably disclose it just because it's not worth it, and if they have an engineer come in, they're not gonna see anything, because it is fine. So I would probably, because theoretically, if you have the hail and water provision, I don't know that I would wanna split hairs between whether it was rebuilt or not rebuilt. I think it's still, if there's any of the structure that's still there. I personally would disclose it because I think it's, like, for example, look at Jamie's situation. They've used abundance level of caution. They've done everything they should have done to make sure that the integrity was there. They've got certificates on the structural integrity of the foundation. You know, they have nothing to hide. It's, you know, so if you have nothing to hide, why not, you know, why not be honest about it? Because the last thing you want to do is have somebody say, well, you know what? Technically, that house had this, this, and this, and you didn't disclose it, so we want you to buy it back from us because we want to move to Tuscaloosa. You know, it's just question. You just don't want to, to me, I'm a big over discloser. Not like on social media, but like in the form of, yeah, so, hey, this was great. I hope, appreciate everybody coming, so.